What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter Burtonette. Just got done filming my breakdown of top 5 games in the Big Ten this coming season, 2024. So now I'm presenting the top 5 games in the SEC this coming season as the conferences, especially the Power 4, release their schedules. The SEC had done this a few weeks ago, but just getting around to it now. But before I do, get in the top 5 games. If you want to enjoy this video, please feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel, and turn on those post notifications so you're always up to date whenever I post. But without further ado, let's dive into it. And as you've seen in this series by now, this is the 4th out of 4. I'm always starting out with the firsts in these games, and those are the first games for the new teams joining these conferences this year. And in the SEC, almost said the Big 12 because these two teams are coming in from the Big 12, that being Oklahoma and Texas. The Sooners will open up with a pretty solid game. This is a game that they had played recently, actually a series in a non-conference slate. They'll be opening at home against Tennessee on September 21st. I'll have to verify whether or not that is actually a conference game or a non-conference. I know I mixed that up in the Big 12 video, but that's their first game against an SEC opponent at the very least. And then Texas the following week is at home against Mississippi State. I think between these two games, Oklahoma-Tennessee is probably the better game. I think Texas, considering what they were able to achieve this year as a college football playoff team and who they have coming back, should be able to defeat the Bulldogs fairly easily, but you never know in the SEC. So both of these games, I'm sure, will be a good welcome for the Sooners and Longhorns to the SEC. Moving on to number 4, kind of have to include this game. It is the matchup between the two teams who are joining, but I think it will be hugely important, not only in the SEC race, but in the race for the college football playoff, especially as it expands to 12 teams this year, and that is the Red River rivalry, the showdown at the Cotton Bowl in Dallas, Oklahoma against Texas on October 12th. Will the Cotton Bowl be a classic again? We've seen so many over the years, especially recent years, and this past year, Dylan Gabriel leading the Sooners to a big win late, the Longhorns' lone defeat of the regular season. But it is, Gabriel now is moved on to Oregon, and the Sooners, will certainly have to see who steps up next at quarterback, and I'm sure I'll get into that in future videos coming up here soon as we really dive into the offseason. But this is a big game. Brent Venables has the Sooners moving in the right direction, finished with 10 wins this season. They did lose the Alamo Bowl to Arizona, but the Wildcats were a special story this year and an upstart team that played really well. And then for the Longhorns, Queen Ewers is coming back this year, among others, to Austin, and I think the Longhorns are in a prime position to compete. Both teams are college football playoff candidates, especially in the 12-team field. I do think the loser of this game will have their work cut out for them to make the playoff. I think the winner, this is a game that you win this game, you get that under your belt, you're in a really comfortable position. But this is a huge game. At number 3, I have Ole Miss at LSU. It's actually the same week, so maybe mark your calendar, save the date for October 12th, because this is a rematch of an absolute classic this past year. Jackson Dart led the Rebels to a 51-45 win over the LSU Tigers, and this year the game is in Baton Rouge, and it's a question of whether the Tigers, who lose Heisman Trophy winner Jaden Daniels, can take a step back into competing for the college football playoff now, what will be 5 years removed from the national championship winning season with Joe Burrow and all the receivers that he had, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, among others. And so it's a big game. I think, again, the question is, can the Tigers take that step up? And this is one of those games that will determine it. I think in terms of entertainment value, based on what happened this past season, this might be the number 1 game in terms of entertainment, at the very least. Maybe not the stakes are quite as high as the next 2 games, but very, very much a fun game. And then after this game, the Rebels have a bye before taking on the Sooners at home. So I think that, kind of adding a couple games here in the discussion on this number 3 is Ole Miss next game against Oklahoma. And then for LSU, they go to Arkansas and Texas A&M. And I think they have either a bye in between those games or after the A&M game, and then they're home against Alabama on November 9th. So both of these teams, after this one, have a couple of big games that could determine whether they make the playoff, because I think these are two teams, Ole Miss being one that I think ended up being in the final CFP rankings number 10, 11, or 12. I'm trying to remember exactly where they were, but they were right in that contention for those spots. And if they can have another season with two losses, or obviously fewer, they could be in a good position to make the playoff. But I think this will be a game that will decide that. I think the loser of this game is probably out of the picture. Of course, it is possible that this is the only loss for either team, but I think there's probably a couple more on the schedule for both of these teams. So this is a very, very important game on October 12th. Moving into the number 2 spot, really number 2 and number 1 are kind of interchangeable, and I almost would be willing to put this one up to number 1 just because of what Alabama is losing, but this is Georgia at Texas on October 19th. This is a question for the Longhorns, is can Texas compete with the best of the best in the SEC? They proved it this past year by beating Alabama on the road in a non-conference game, but can they do it in a conference game against a team that won back-to-back national championships recently? So this is a huge test, and it's also a test for the Bulldogs. You know, they are going into Austin, which is a tough place to win. At least last year. It hasn't always been, but it was last year. They were perfect at home. And the Longhorns, again, like I said already, are bringing back a lot of production, a lot of talent. And this game will be big for both of these teams because it puts them kind of in a position to have a foothold. But there's a game that comes before this. I have it at number 1 just because it was literally the game between the top 2 teams in the SEC this past year, and that's Georgia-Alabama. The two faced off, obviously, in the SEC championship game with Alabama and Nick Saban for the last time coming out on top to kind of steal a playoff spot from the Bulldogs, who were, at the time, before the game, heading into another college football playoff as the top team and looking to three-peat. But Alabama spoiled those plans, and this will be a chance for Georgia to get revenge. It'll be in Tuscaloosa. This is Kalen DeBoer's first real big test, big game at Alabama, and the Bulldogs will be looking to spoil that early test. Both of these teams, I think it's likely that they're 3 or 4-0. I don't exactly remember how many games they have before this, but Georgia does play Clemson, so that's a game to watch in the opener, but I think both teams are probably undefeated heading into this one, and whichever team wins in this game gets the earliest foothold. And because of it being later in the season, I honestly probably would move the Georgia-Texas game up to the number 1 spot, but this game is a big one. It's between the two powerhouses of the SEC for the last couple of decades, Georgia more recently and Alabama kind of over that whole stretch. But this is, a test for both teams, especially for Alabama bringing in a new head coach, saying goodbye to the greatest of all time, Nick Saban. And for the Bulldogs, it's can they get back to that status of being the best in college football? Obviously, to get that title, somebody's going to have to beat Michigan first, but this is a big game to watch in the SEC, and it's one that I'm looking forward to. And of course, there are some other games, fun games to look forward to. Some teams like a Missouri that can be expected to potentially try to, repeat some of the success they had this year. There will be games that the Tigers have that are similar to that Ole Miss LSU game. If they're able to steal one here or there, they could easily find themselves in the college football playoff race. But that is it for the breakdown of the top 5 games in the SEC schedule in 2024. Let me know your thoughts below on what games you're most looking forward to, which you think will be the best games, and who you think will come out on top in the SEC, and who you think will make the 12-team field out of the conference. But that's it for this video, College Football Talk. I'm your host, Peter Burtnett. Have a great rest of your day. I'm signing out. Peace.